Last week I was in a water park in Portugal with my family. Today I'm back in Llangatug. Enough said. Let's move on. In this video I'm going to be recapping on the performance management process and talking about some changes which have been introduced to the system as of December the 31st, 2012. These changes could potentially have an impact on what people are paid, so it's important that everyone taking part in performance management follows the procedures set out in the policy that I emailed to you before the holidays. Performance management is well embedded into school culture and everyone is familiar with the current arrangements, but perhaps it doesn't have the prominence that it deserves. I know that there are people who do a much better job than I've ever done for the people I review, and we need to learn from them in order to make the process better and more consistent. From my perspective, it's something that gets done at the very end of term, when everyone's knackered and only thinking about their halls. The fact that achieving performance management targets could potentially affect people's ability to move up the pay scale may help to focus people's minds. As I said earlier, following the policy is vital. I also think that beginning the cycle and reviewing performance at the beginning rather than the end of term would be better. You're all aware of the performance management cycle of planning, monitoring and review, but it is important to recognise that it's a cycle and not an event. I know I've been guilty of not recognising this. As a cycle, professional dialogue between appraisee and appraisers is supposed to take place throughout the year, not simply at the end. An important change in the planning stage, necessary as a result of the new arrangements, is that what determines the objectives for each individual now includes things like practicing teacher standards and national priorities. Attaining the objectives set out in the planning stage, as I've said, could have a bearing on pay progression for those eligible. As a result, objectives will more than ever need to be clear, challenging, and above all, measurable, and criteria as to whether targets have been met applied consistently, which is a major challenge considering the numbers involved. There will have to be some system introduced for reviewing targets to make sure that they're not too challenging for some while not being challenging enough for others. Ultimately, the head will have the say on this. Performance management has traditionally been based around school development plans, and in particular CPD, pupil progress, and one other area decided by negotiation. Objectives related to pupil progress have usually been broad and might include qualitative improvements or relatively small steps in progress. Under the new arrangements, performance management is explicitly linked to school, local and national priorities, pupil performance, practicing teacher standards and pay progression. It's likely that targets will need to focus more on what's measurable with regards to the first two and how far it can be proven that the criteria for practicing teacher standards have been met. These standards are not meant to be used as a checklist, but more as a self-review framework to help teachers plan their CPD. There's a link to the teacher standards in the performance management policy draft that I mentioned earlier. A new list of appraisers and appraisees has been drawn up, as shown. The reason this has been done is to reduce the number of appraisers in an attempt to improve consistency so that all staff are treated fairly. Further training will be provided for appraisers as the term progresses. The current cycle will be completed with existing appraisers before moving to the new pairings. The policy sets out the performance management arrangements. As I mentioned, it's important that everyone is familiar with this and follows the procedures it sets out. Arrangements for the performance management cycle begin with a meeting to review your development needs and decide objectives for the coming year. As I mentioned, performance management is a process, not an event, and something that should be arranged in the initial meeting is a date for a mid-year review. If you fail to meet the agreed and identified objectives, it could have implications for your salary. You're entitled to a mid-year review as part of the statutory guidance, and I suggest you put one in your diary. This initial meeting can be combined with a review of achievements to celebrate success and identify areas for improvement and CPD activities. Those people who've already completed their performance management review for 2012-2013 will not be asked to redo these. If you haven't yet completed your review for last year, I suggest you do this as soon as possible and before the end of September at the latest. An important change to the process is that everyone needs to keep a practice review and development PRD record as from now, and this can be found in Annex A of the policy. This will form a part of the review meeting. The performance management policy contains information on the PRD record, and it suggests that the record is completed at key points during the cycle. As for this cycle, everybody should use the new documentation. This slide looks at the areas that need to be considered when setting objectives under the new arrangements. If performance management is to be something meaningful and justify the amount of time invested in it, we need to move towards something that people feel is worthwhile, challenging, motivating, and makes a real difference in the classroom. We need as a central principle to recognise that improving classroom skills is the key, rather than the creation of objectives, often focusing on teacher tasks, where it's almost impossible to identify the impact or difference made. Focusing on improving classroom skills would create a culture where all teachers try to evaluate and improve their practice. Each of us would identify the aspects of practice to improve within the framework provided by school, national, and our roles and responsibilities. We're used to these. What we're not so familiar with are the professional standards. These set out the professional characteristics expected and could be useful in identifying areas to work on, providing that we keep in mind that whatever we choose has to improve classroom practice and have a direct impact on pupils' learning. In the review meeting, evidence in the form of measures of pupil achievement, questionnaire responses, reports from peer observation, and so on, could be used to support our claims to have improved practice in ways that benefit pupils. The important point is that each of us would have to evaluate our own progress. The CPD needs identified for all staff should then all have as a focus improving practice. Performance criteria with regard to objectives will need to be specified from the outset, and there will need to be a common understanding amongst appraisers as to what constitutes substantial in terms of contributing to school improvement and sustained improvement in terms of professional development. As previously, there should be at least 3 objectives, but there could be more. At the end of the cycle, the review statement and training development needs sheet should be completed. The appraiser's judgment on performance is now part of this statement and forms the basis for the recommendation for a salary rise for eligible teachers. The statement and training and development needs sheets should be copied to the appraisee and the head. Finally, a reminder that lesson observation is a statutory part of the process, and cover will be provided if necessary to enable this to take place. My responsibilities now include, amongst other things, performance management, staff development and emerging technologies development. My intention in this presentation was to give information about changes to the performance management process, but in a way which demonstrates how technology can be used by a teacher to present information. The tools are all available on the iPad to do this. I created the presentation in Keynote, added the commentary in an app called Explain Everything, and uploaded the file as a video to YouTube. The same process could be used to present information to pupils on any topic, which then becomes a permanent record to be viewed as convenient. Finally, can I ask all those people who borrowed iPads over the holidays to return them to me today or tomorrow in my room, and to let either myself or Maxine have the completed feedback sheets regarding tools you think would work in your classrooms. I intend to set some time aside this year to help anyone who would like to do things to improve their own practice with regard to technology, and I will use the feedback sheets as the basis of planning this. I'll place a summary of today's presentation in your pigeonholes at some point today. Thanks.